Okay. I hit record and I'm with Lisa. Lisa, I didn't ask you how to pronounce your last name. Banu?
No, Bonneau.
Bonneau. I was very close.
You don't speak French.
No. I did grow up in New Orleans, but the French that
Oh,
we heard was
yeah,
you know,
not quite
not
the same.
not pure
Right,
French.
right.
Yeah. Uh okay, so Lisa, tell me, I was just joking with you off camera that it's like it's this is always a weird transition for me for people that I work with all the time because I'm like, I don't why are we doing this? I know exactly who you are. Tell me, tell anybody listening where you are in your author journey.
Well, I am at literally the very beginning. I started writing, not this novel, but I started writing in September. When I lost my husband 2.5 years ago, and finally 2.5 years later I could start, or 2 years later, I really wanted to make sure that I memorialized him as a person for my, if my kids are listening, they're going to hear me say my upcoming grandchildren, and because I really would like some. But it's really, our family does this a lot,
I
right?
like the future casting. That's great.
Yep. These a few grandchildren.
That's it.
Um, and our family does this a lot with our family members, and I wanted to be sort of join that sort of family, writing books about our relatives. And I thought it was really important I did this for him. So it was very expository, very third person, very, very, very personal. And so I started listening to your podcast because my sister-in-law sent it to me one time, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so I literally binge listened for a couple of months. And then I joined the Dash. And I remember writing you a letter and saying, I'm really brand new. I've only been doing these little vignettes about my husband. I want to
Hmm.
join the Dash. And you were like, okay, it's not a novel, but we can make it work. And then I thought, wait a minute, hold on. I actually have a novel in my head as well. I had been thinking about, and I've been trying to figure out what it was going to be. And I thought, I'll just do that. And then right before the Dash, that whole idea, I could not put it together. Like something in my head was like, don't write that. You're not going to write that now. Write what you really want to write, which is something about yourself, your life,
Mm,
and have it come from you first. And so I did. And through the first part of the first month of the Dash, I wrote the whole plot. I hadn't, I
nice.
had thought about it through a little bit, but it was like I made that dedication, and I was like, wow, I can't believe I just did that. Because I was like, I wonder if I could write a novel. I don't
Mm,
know if I could write a novel or not. I'm going to give it a try. And so I have been just going, the Dash really helped with that. It like made that commitment. And so I'm that brand new. So like
nice.
since the Dash,
Yeah.
novel writing.
So 10 months and then like novel writing actually for like 2 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Basically 2.5 months.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So you got me, like shocked me a little bit before we came on because you sent me a piece and I left notes in it. And then you just told me I have already edited this, but you changed so much that I didn't recognize it. Which,
We did a session, and you read two different carpool scenarios,
yeah,
and you gave me such great feedback that I went back because I knew something was wrong. That's why I brought it to you. I knew
it's
something wasn't
so
right.
different.
It's so different, right? I
Yeah,
totally like totally, and of course during the Dash, all those office hours, I'm asking questions about those two scenes that I'm trying to
yeah.
think about in my writing. So I'm
Well,
a
and
slow writer, so
I'm weird this way. I almost never forget something I edit. Like I could talk to you about things that I edited for people. Like I could right now start talking to you about I've done 200 and over 250 clients at this point, but I could talk to you about the piece the first client I had was. And
wow,
like I could talk to you through like what we did. I just have one of those brains. It's not the reading of it, it's the talking through it
right.
that locks it in. And so you got me. This is one of the first times I've ever read something and not realized, oh, I've already edited this once.
I'm
So
thinking it was so bad
kudos.
the
That's
first
the way to
time.
go.
Well, I don't know. I think it was so bad the first time that you're like, I don't know. I got to forget that.
No, I see. Once you said that, I was like, oh, I see it. But I think you've made such such exciting changes. I didn't see what was there before. I wouldn't say it was bad last time. I think the way you've shaped the character voices, the way that you've paced the conversation is very different. I like it much more now. Like we'll go through it in a second. You'll notice there's large sections where I have no notes, but I thought it was really great.
Thank you.
Um, but yeah, you totally got me. You totally
All
got
right.
me.
Give me
Yeah,
1 point
that's
anyway.
right. Point for Lisa. Um, okay, is there anything before I just start going through the notes? Is there anything specific you want to make sure we cover?
So in my notes to you, one of the things was the voice, the character voice,
Yeah,
because
Tiffany's
I
voice. Yeah.
knew I had gotten it wrong. I had written it in a way that was not the way I wanted to write it. And
Hmm.
so I went back and changed it and changed their whole, the two characters in this are the two main people who have dialogue through the first half of the first act. And I changed them from being very irritating and like
Hmm.
ignoring to actually becoming friends. So the whole idea of this first car scene, because there's like 2 or 3 car scenes in the first half of the act, is that the main character is still has known Tiffany for a long time, but not really known her, and will hopefully will come across is that she literally is sort of really getting to know her fast and really feeling a connection. And those voices, I wanted to make sure I was getting that across, like in their conversation. This is the beginning of a friendship, the beginning of my main character losing some of her sort of like not wanting to share
Yeah.
and being more willing to share and finding Tiffany somebody that she can do that with because she's going to need Tiffany at the end,
Yeah.
and so I need this to grow, and it does through the second car pooling scene. But
Yeah. I like, let's talk big to small. Oh, so was there, besides Tiffany's voice and the character
hold
interactions,
on,
was
let
there
me
any other big things you
actually
wanted to look
check.
at?
I'm going to look back. Let's see. Oh, the other one that I'm I have found as I've been writing through the different scenes, and my scenes are days at this point. I know they
Hmm.
won't end up that way, that I'm coming up with at the beginning of every scene a like a reflection or memory. One of the scenes I'm writing right now, she talks about her brother, and so it's a flashback to her brother in the sandbox and what he was like because that's what he's still like. And so I want to make sure that what is the very beginning of the story, which is a flashback scene to her and her husband, is makes sense within the story. Like maybe if it doesn't, it could be somewhere else, but it
Hmm.
doesn't make sense. It wasn't somehow I just felt it was important to write it and it felt
Yeah.
right to me, but I don't know if it fits into the beginning of the story or whether I need to change that
Okay.
flashback to something different.
Okay. That's good to know. So
Yeah.
we'll look at that too. Is there a third, anything else you want
I
to
don't
make sure?
think so. I mean, it was the voices. Oh yeah, so no, the fact that this sort of am I getting this historical past that they have together clear because I talk about that in some of the places you sort of marked off, and I thought, do I need them or do I not?
Yeah.
Their history, their previous history, and how that's going to change in their new relationship. So it's sort of that whole feeling of how that's being how
Okay.
their relationship is changing from what they were before.
Okay.
So that might
Okay.
sound I feel like that sounds cryptic, but
Nope. I totally understand what you're talking about. Okay. I'm going to share my screen and let's talk through this together. Can you see the piece here?
yeah.
Okay, great. So I want to do like big scope to small, like let's talk through the big movements here and what you're doing, and then we can go through the individual pieces. So the individual notes. So we have this opening flashback. We don't know well, I mean, we know it's a flashback at first, but we don't know where Diane's your POV, your vehicle character. We don't know where she is here. Like
Victoria. It's
Victoria,
Victoria.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Victoria's your man.
I
It's
don't like
gonna
the
be one of
name.
those nights. Um, Victoria's your vehicle character. We don't when we kick off because you start in the flashback, we don't know in the present moment where she is.
Right.
But then you have a good transition where and we can look at the transition in detail in a minute. You have a good transition where she gets pulled back into, oh, she's waiting in a car for Tiffany to show up and like join her in the carpool. You have a nice transition here where she comes back into the present. And then for the rest of the piece, we're in the present in the car with her and Tiffany as they drive to work together. Um, and the emotional flow here is nice. The conversation starts off hard. This is what I saw. Tell me if this is what you're looking for.
Hmm.
The conversation starts off hard. You have Victoria having this big emotional transition between the like grieving, reminiscing of this moment with her husband, and then transitioning into this kind of stark, aggressive conversation with this woman in her car and not wanting to be there. And then they have some moments of silence. The conversation's getting awkward. And then Victoria has a turn and she decides to engage.
Right.
And when she decides to engage, the conversations actually they kind of draw together.
Right. So
So
I didn't want it to be, I wanted it to, at the very beginning of the conversation, for her to be still trying to come out of that sense of the daydream that she was having,
mhm.
waiting for Tiffany to come out. And then and then being friendly because they work together and they've known each other, but not overly friendly, sharing information. At the very end, when she starts when they start talking about their previous work together,
Yeah,
that's when that bond starts
that's
to
when that
happen.
bond starts to form.
Yeah.
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 So I like to sometimes I like to think of when you have a one-on-one scene like this where you've just got two characters, specifically Victoria and Tiffany. I like to think of them as, are they facing each other or turned away from each other? Meaning who's engaging with who, right? Like, so if we have in this conversation, if we have Victoria and we have Tiffany, we start with Victoria turned away and then Tiffany aggressively trying to turn in. And then as Victoria refuses to engage, Tiffany kind of does this. She doesn't fully turn away, but she definitely starts to disengage. And then finally, Victoria's like, okay, I'm going to do this. And when she does that, Tiffany comes back. And by the end, they're engaged with each other. So it's a
Okay.
nice, you have a nice kind of emotional flow there. So that's just the way that I can kind of visualize characters and how they're interacting with each other is, are they are they turning their backs on one another? Or are they facing each other emotionally? Where's the engagement level here? And you're doing a nice job of getting them engaged. Um, okay, so let's go beat by beat. Now that we kind of know the structure, let's go a take at a time. You have this opening paragraph here, which I really like. It's really well written. It's got a nice descriptive. You got good, solid descriptive sentences, like the tall mountains of the Catalinas in Tucson, Arizona, rise above the desert floor, wilds, saguaro cactuses, the tall, spindly, I'm not going to read that word, cactuses,
Ocotillos.
Ocotillo cactuses with its red orange flowers waving in the wind, and the Palo Verde trees currently in full bloom, yellow and teeming with thousands of flowers. Very descriptive. I can totally see it. Right now, you go on to focus on the cactuses and the thing about and how like prickly they are. The thing about these opening descriptions is this is not just establishing the scenery, it's setting an emotional tone. And when you talk about how prickly the cactuses are, we come into this with a sense of danger,
Interesting. Okay.
of like, oh, somebody gonna get hurt, right? It is the old, you know, kind of silly thing of, if you show me a gun, somebody better be shot, right? It's the same. You're setting an emotional tone here of like danger and unease by focusing on these cactuses. And and as a writer, you're making a choice here, right? Like, look at all the things you laid out at the front. You've got mountains, you've got cactuses, you've got flowers waving in the wind, you've got trees in full bloom, yellow and teeming with thousands of flowers. So you had at least four things there you could have focused on, but you pull into the cactuses and how they could rip you apart. And then, so I was expecting a fight here.
Interesting. I would
I
never have seen, I would not have thought that.
Yeah,
I
like emotionally, I'm coming into it
Yeah.
going like, oh man, I'm uneasy. This is a dangerous landscape. But we don't have a fight. We have a very sweet and like lovely conversation between two people that very much care for each other. And so I if you're doing the contrast on purpose, it's interesting and I want to talk to you about it and then encourage you not to do it. If you're if you weren't doing it on purpose, I think this is going to be better served rewriting this to focus on the flowers.
Yes, and I could totally do that. The desert is beautiful. It started out because part of the next paragraph was how, as we were walking bushwhacking, which is no
Mm-hmm.
trail, how how I just like literally scratched up legs, and so that's where it started because cactuses will do that. Like, and they're
Yeah.
gorgeous in them, so I can change this to be positive also.
I
Like
would
they're
make it
gorgeous.
positive. Yeah,
Yeah,
and you said in your like intro to me that you're going to do these kind of small flashbacks at the beginning of many of the chapters.
yeah, yeah,
I love that. One of the things I would do as you do this is know that we are on an emotional journey with the vehicle character. So we are tracking through the story with Victoria and how Victoria feels. These flashbacks are giving us a raw emotion for Victoria. That's the purpose of these.
right.
Yes, we learn about her backstory. Yes, we learn about Michael. Yes, we learn about their relationship. But what we care about and what we're really going to absorb is the emotional punch of these. And the contrast, what's really nice about this one that you're using is the contrast between this peaceful two people who are fully engaged and facing each other in the conversation with the new Victoria in the present who is lost in grief. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
So
okay,
I
good.
think there's a lot of potential. But I would be, when you write these, I would be very careful and like very strategic with what's the emotional tone I'm conveying at every turn of these.
Okay,
And then how does that emotional tone set up Victoria for the scene before?
okay.
For the scene in the present,
For the
not
next
the
part
scene
of
in
the
the before,
scene,
the scene
right.
in the present. Yeah.
Okay,
The other thing I want you to think about doing is you're writing in third person present. So you ready? Michael asks, pointing to break at the tall cactus in the desert high up in the mountain. That's today's goal, Buck Saddle. And then like when we get down here with, in the car, Victoria, a familiar voice calls my name, right? This is the transition sentence in. Yes, Michael, Victoria, it's Tiffany. I turn my head towards the voice of Michael's face. So I turn my head towards, right, a familiar voice calls. It's all happening right now in the present.
right.
I think if you can do it, it's going to be tough because you're going to have to flip your brain. I think it's a great technique if flashbacks are in the past tense and the current moments in the present tense.
Okay. I wasn't sure about that because I definitely, there was a point where I wrote when I went through my first draft of this, it was all in the past tense. And then all of a sudden there was a moment where I'm like, I need to write this very personally from me, and then I wasn't quite sure sometimes which one to use. So I switched it all. I think
Yeah.
maybe I meant to do it in the first person for the flashback also. But I didn't. I can see that I didn't. I'll try that. I can totally do the past tense in the flashbacks.
Yeah, I would try it. I like it because it communicates. You want to drift in and out of these flashbacks seamlessly, like you do in this chapter, and you want to make it an easy transition, but you can't always have her shocked and surprised. That's otherwise every chapter she's gonna be like, "What?" You can't always have her doing that. You're gonna have to transition out of these in some different ways too.
Right, right.
Flipping the tense is going to give you a tool to allow you that
Okay,
smooth transition.
okay, perfect.
Um, to let the reader know this is in the past. This has already happened. Um, and again, it's going to be tough, but I'd give it a shot.
No, I could totally see that.
Yeah. So this would end up being like, "You ready?" Michael asked, pointing at the break in the tall side of the guys of the mountain. That's today's goal, Buck Saddle. I followed his finger up the mountain, locating our destination. His face was so close, almost touch showed the beginning of the weekend stubble. Yeah, so just like giving that past tense.
Okay.
Um, I took this statement here and I put it up here because you have a long. He says one thing, and then you have nonverbal communication between the two of them, which is great. We're still in the dialogue here, that nonverbal communication. Then you pulled me out of the dialogue with a reflective paragraph.
Okay.
I couldn't believe we were here together, that I was able to share the desert of my childhood with him, that I finally had my life partner by my side. This is her reflecting internally on what's going on. You then brought me back into the dialogue for one sentence. You then took me into a descriptive paragraph.
Okay.
So this, I took this and put it up here so that we can have a full segment of dialogue. Now that you're out of the segment of dialogue, you have the ability to have 2 to 3 to 4 paragraphs of exposition
Okay.
without interrupting the emotional connections in the dialogue. Does
That
that
makes
make
sense.
sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. I might try to take this. You're really looking to show us the emotional connection between Michael and Victoria and give us a picture of what she lost. That emotional connection is going to be better displayed in their interaction with each other than it is in a descriptive paragraph like this.
Right. I definitely tried to do that. Um, I tried to do that a lot, so that's why there's so much
Yeah,
dialogue in it. But
it's
you think
great.
here too?
Yeah. And
Okay.
so I might do it here too, just to get rid of this. Because right now, this paragraph, it's nicely written, but it falls a little flat emotionally because you're
Yeah.
just telling us what they're going to do.
Right.
I'd rather see them talk about it.
Okay.
And
Okay.
seeing them talk about it would give me the emotional connection between the two of them. And my bet is you're going to find some interplay between the two of them while you do it. Like I wrote this little just kind of dumb thing on the side, but you're like, so are we ready? Are we really doing it today? Doing what? I said with a coy smile, you know what I mean? Oh, you meant bushwhacking up the front, right? Like
Yeah.
just you're gonna find little interplays
Oh
between them
no,
like
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's gonna that's what the real gold you're mining for in these flashbacks is they're interacting. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Okay. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Um again, the transition is great. Um this is a really solid, like this is another place we come to the end of a segment here, right? There's the cawing of the bird. Wow, we both say at the same time. I wonder what it would be like to be a bird, I asked, to be able to glide down my path, catching and dominating the winds of the mountains, to be free wherever, to be free to go wherever you want. It would be amazing. And then the next thing here is like the next segment is, should we go right to the outcropping today? So we've been like having this moment, this whimsical moment about birds, and then we're going to planning. And you've got in the in between segment a little mini paragraph here. If you wanted more reflection on her experience with him and how she feels, this is the place for it.
Okay. So another place I could put that because I did put a
Another
little.
place.
I wanted to be
Yeah.
careful not to put too much to just
Yeah.
introduce him because he'll come back in full force later on, as almost a character in the second part of the first act.
Yeah.
I didn't want to give too much, and I didn't want to drag it out. But if I can put in more, of
It
course.
moves really well right now. I'm just pointing it out so you know in the
Yeah.
future, like, oh, if I have a moment like this is where I can put those
Okay.
reflections.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Um, I really like the turn. This is again, this is where I would switch back to present tense the
Right.
minute
Right.
Tiffany's voice shows up. And I like this. You're gonna have these two paragraphs here that you have that convey her like coming back into the present. Just know you're probably gonna have to do something like this every time you come back.
Yeah. I
Where
have
we,
been.
oh,
I have
good.
as I write them. Yeah.
Yeah. And what you're doing is grounding the reader into the actual scene.
Yeah.
Okay, here's where we actually are. Here's what's actually happening. Um, okay, any questions or anything you want to talk about with Michael before we move down into
No,
the
thank you. No, that's
carpool?
good.
Oh, great, good. Um, I'm just breaking up. You had a long Like, no problem. It wasn't far on my way. I respond, handing her a napkin. She looks at me quizzically as I point out the drops on the dashboard. Thanks, I say, watching her wipe up the coffee. I just want to give her active choice here.
Oh,
So I'm just
okay.
throwing in a sentence that, like, oh, right, she laughs,
Good,
giving her
yeah.
like an active moment.
She's a little embarrassed about that. She's like, "Oh, what was I supposed to do with the napkin?"
Yeah, yeah. Well, and she's oblivious too, which is
Right.
right away you're setting. I like here how right away you're setting up the tension between the two characters, where immediately Victoria's like, "Hey, fix this thing that you just did."
Yeah.
Um, Here you've got this, like, yep, she replies and I glance at her, smiling, wondering how I'm going to be able to fill the car ride with conversation. Perfect. You're setting up the conflict of the rest of the passage with us. Isn't that what people expect while carpooling? Tiffany will. She has no problem finding things to say. So this is the conflict of the scene.
Okay.
You had the rest of this paragraph here kind of reflecting on where she is emotionally and giving me a lot of backstory. Right. I
Yeah.
can talk about those close to me those days, those who have supported me through Michael's death, but with others, I balk, struggling to find words or appropriate topics of conversation. That sentence makes me go, oh, so I'm going to see a bunch of people that she has good relationships with, which I know I'm not because you've told me the plot. So
Right.
that sentence sets up an expectation that you're not going to fulfill as an author. And although Tiffany and I started out close at the beginning of our careers 25 years ago, we're going to learn that later. You don't need to tell me that now.
Right.
Marriage and kids separated us for many of the last 20. Again, I'll learn that later. I don't need to know that now. Suddenly, I realized that I've never talked to her about Michael's death. So now I'm like, oh, they're going to talk about Michael's death, but they're not going to talk about
They're
Michael's
not
death.
going to talk
So
about it. No,
you're
that's the whole thing.
yeah,
Those are
you're
the
setting up a
narrative.
false expectation for me that,
Okay.
like, oh, we're going to talk about it, and we're not. Having left my grief at the front of the door of the office in an attempt to function professionally on a daily basis of work, I'm not sure I want to open that door now. So the conflict of the scene is actually up here.
Right.
And you've established the conflict through the emotional change
Okay.
that Victoria's had. She and Tiffany are in two different places.
So what I was trying to get across there was the limitations of their relationship. That
Yeah.
that because she never brought it into work, Tiffany doesn't know. I mean, she knows about the husband, obviously, but they've never had that conversation. And I was trying to establish, maybe I don't need to because they're
Yeah.
already going to they're going to, eventually she will talk to her. Well, later on, I'm not even sure she will. It'll be much later on and it'll become a problem for the two of them. And that's maybe what I was trying to set up. Like in the second act, that's the fact that there's so much grief Tiffany can't handle because she didn't go through that with her, and so it's going to break up their friendship later on. And so I maybe was trying to put that in as a precursor to that
Yeah, I can see
honestly.
you spelling out, like, oh, this is conflict that I want to put in. You need to show us and not tell us, though,
Okay.
because we won't remember it.
Okay.
You can tell us this here and then pay it off in Act Two. If we don't see it in the dialogue, we won't remember.
It
So
better, maybe better in act two when it happens, then they have that conversation. Like we never talked about this. We
that's what I
never
want
told
it.
me
And
about
I,
Mike.
I want
Yeah.
Victoria to surprise Tiffany with it. I want her to be like, we're not close. We've never even talked about you've never even asked about my husband's death. And
Yeah.
Tiffany's be like, how should I know to ask about that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Victoria will be
Okay.
like, it's all I think about. Right. Like,
Right.
and now you have this like connection to the flashbacks. But I want you to, like, what you've already shown me is Victoria's in a different emotional space. Victoria is not ready for this carpool. Tiffany is a little chaos engine.
Yeah.
That's what you've already shown me.
Yes.
So you've already set up the emotional conflict.
Okay. All right.
And
That
then
makes sense.
I'd keep these first two lines because of inner reflection, because it's good to see her recognize the immediate conflict. Okay, this is what we're doing. Tiffany's going to talk, and I don't know how to talk to her because I'm not a normal person yet.
Right. Right.
And then as they talk, like, and so you've set up the conflict. The rest of this we don't need. It
Okay.
just becomes noise. And so we're going
Right.
to I'd cut the noise.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. Um, Do you need a transition here? You had just put this line in here. Do I
Yeah,
need a
that's my, I had a
transition here?
question there because I wasn't sure. It felt a little abrupt to me. Because I was trying to like get these different segments in that sort of moved from feeling uncomfortable to little less gardening, a little less comfortable, a little more comfortable. I could talk about that, and
Hmm.
then finally at the very end, finding something they could actually talk about. And so I didn't. I was trying to get those some transitions in there for that, either by looking apart or by taking a coffee break or looking at the gardens or something to separate them out. And I felt like something was missing here.
Yeah, I think so. The reason you feel like something's missing is because you're at the end of a segment, and
Okay.
it's a natural place where you're like going to add that reflective paragraph for transition. Because she's like, how long does it usually take to get to work? About 40 minutes if you take the highway, 45 depending on traffic. Highway it is, I say, put in the car and driving carefully, and carefully back out of her driveway. What a what a well, not so beautiful day, Tiffany begins. Can you believe this rain? So you've got this one segment and then a new segment starting
Right.
here.
Right.
There's a natural feeling for you to be like, okay, I need something here to transition. What you need is an inner reflection
Okay.
where she's like, kind of here we go. Right.
Okay.
Like already I'm out of things to talk about and I'm just pulling out of the driveway. It
Right.
could literally just be that sentence, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
and
Okay.
then let Tiffany jump in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I knew there
But
was something in it that didn't feel right.
yeah, and it's that, if you feel that, look, see if you're in a new segment, if you've changed topic or emotional tone. If you change topic or emotional tone, what you're probably looking for is a sentence or two of reflection.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, I am taking her voice, Victoria's voice, and just cutting it back a little.
Okay.
To
Too much
cut, you do a
information.
great job with Tiffany. Tiffany's got that run on voice that's going really well. So I'm just cutting some words that are already implied,
Okay.
right?
All
Like
right.
columbines are my favorite, especially the red ones. What's your favorite perennial? Which is such a great weird question. Tiger lilies, right? Like you had, I like tiger lilies. We just need tiger lilies. My
Okay.
grandmother used to have a whole bunch of them in a garden before she died. I grow them in her memory. Just my grandmother used to have a whole bunch of them in the garden before she died. And that's all you need, right?
Right.
Like, because she's sharing the bare minimum. She, again, remember, she's emotionally facing away. She
Yeah.
hasn't turned yet, so she's not going to
Right.
give.
Exactly.
She's only going to give like little bits and pieces of things.
Yeah. Okay.
And you might even do this: tiger lilies.
And that's it.
Why tiger lilies? Right?
Oh, okay.
Like so fascinating. Like have Tiffany just all in,
Yeah.
and then say, "My grandmother used to have a whole bunch of them in her
Okay.
garden
That,
before
yeah,
she
that
died."
makes sense.
Right? And then this is nice. The car is quiet for a few minutes while she eats her scone.
Yeah.
That's great because because leaving this on before she died is kind of a heavy, like, I don't know what to say to that. So like you just like letting it go. Um, if you wanted to really make it painful, have Tiffany be like, "Oh, were you close?" And then have Victoria go, "Very." And then you can cut it, right? Like, but you want it. The car is quiet for a few minutes while Tiffany eats her scone, right? Like it's like you're building to that kind of comedic moment of like Tiffany's really trying, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm giving you nothing. Yeah,
He does a
um,
lot of that, like stopping for a minute and be like, okay, can I talk now again?
yeah, and it's great. Um, you have here an inner thought in italics.
Yeah.
You're writing third person close. No, I'm sorry, you're writing first person POV. You don't need those.
Okay.
They become a little weird because she's commenting on her thinking.
Yes.
I think to myself.
I
She's
wasn't,
commenting on her thinking. So just have her think it, right? Like the car was quiet for a few minutes while Tiffany eats the scone. You don't need that conversation went pretty well. I think to myself, I feel pretty comfortable talking about the plant. So you can just have that conversation went pretty well. I
so I
felt
can
pretty
just have her
comfortable.
saying it.
Yeah,
Oh,
talking about the plants. You can just have it in a paragraph like you do
oh, okay.
everything else, right?
Oh,
Like
okay.
you don't need to do you really only need that kind of italics internal thought when you're writing in third person.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Um This was all great. Um, yeah, Tiffany has a really strong voice in here, and you can really pick out, you have a strong voice for a character when just looking at your page, you can be like, yeah, I can see exactly where Tiffany's talking.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Like,
She rambles.
yeah, and it's good. It's a nice contrast to Victoria and emotionally where Victoria is. Again, all of this was really great. I'm taking out your dialogue tags. You don't need them in a two-person conversation.
It's really interesting. I really struggle. I remember this conversation during one of the office hours. I said,
Hmm.
and sometimes I'm like, um, clearly when there's more than one person, you need to find some other way to say it. And I wasn't quite sure here, and so I was putting in something different, like a reply or an answer. It doesn't feel right to me always to do it that way. Like I wish that there was other ways.
Yeah, I think so. When you're in a one-on-one conversation, the paragraph spacing tells us who's talking.
Okay.
So you don't need them in a one-on-one conversation. They are just for emotional flavor. So, like this one, I'm going to keep. This one isn't bringing any emotional flavor. I
Right.
think the best thing to do is ignore him. I say that's what I try to do whenever possible. It is breaking these two up, but not necessarily in a way that's emotionally meaningful.
Okay.
There's not a lot of difference between that, and I think the best thing to do is ignore him. That's what I try to do whenever possible.
Yeah.
There's not a big difference with that I say in there. This one, though, brings a ton of emotional flavor to the vocalization. Well, I'm not sure I won't need to mutter something sinister under my. Oh, I'm not sure I won't need to mutter something sinister under my breath. She admits, her arms starting to wave in front of her face as she talks. His arrogance makes me cringe. So that adds so much emotionality. Without it, the vocalization actually changes. Well, I'm not sure I won't need to mutter something sinister under my breath. His arrogance makes me cringe. It feels much flatter without that
Yeah.
tag and body language
Without
in there.
her, yeah,
Yeah. So
arms showing.
in a one-on-one, that's the only time you add them,
Okay.
when you want
Okay.
that emotionality. Now, in a three or more person conversation, this is what I would expect it to look like. I reply, she continues, I say, because you need to tell me of the three people there, which one's talking.
Right.
Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. But in this conversation, you don't need them. So I'd just take them out. It's going to move a lot faster without them.
Okay.
Here you have kind of a retrospective on their life together.
Done because that's where they started. And
Hmm.
so I'm trying to put in that little bit of backstory to show why I ended up back there, um, and how we started, how they started together. Um,
Gotcha.
and so I can see, I'm not quite, I want to make sure that as Victoria all of a sudden connects because those memories come back strong. Like
Hmm.
she's starting to pull all that stuff together. Like it's starting to pull all together. She's not in so much grief anymore. And so some of it's starting back, and that this is the point where she hears Tiffany again and like, oh my God, actually, yes. And then something hopefully inside of her is like, I can really connect with her that without saying that out loud.
Okay.
I felt like that needed to their original where they started from 25 years ago in the same business as these young people starting out and dealing with the same crap they're dealing with right now. But way back then, I felt like that was what I was interested in.
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing you say is that you added this paragraph because you want this to be an emotional turn for Victoria,
Right,
where she starts to remember, hey, this woman and I actually have a long relationship, even
yeah,
though we haven't been close.
right. Or come back to it because it's been so
It's
long
been
since.
so long. So, like, maybe, and this is that moment where Victoria's kind of turning
Yeah,
toward, okay.
yeah.
So, right now, this paragraph is about the facts of their relationship.
Hmm.
And a lot of those facts get revealed further down, right?
Okay,
Here are the facts you're telling me. We worked together our first year with Mr. Wright 25 years ago, right? Then you have a fact about I graduated in college and her major, what she did. She worked in a small business, earning money as needed. After a few years feeling the need to start a career and maybe a family, I needed a job and a place to live. Going home was the easiest option, and Mr. Wright, a friend of my father's family at that time, hired me. Like my father, he was a Freemason, and those men really stuck together and supported each other. This is not, has nothing to do with Tiffany and Victoria.
Okay. Now that you're reading it, I can see that.
It's all Tiff. You're just giving
All
me facts
Victoria.
about Tiffany's life, and the facts that have to do with Victoria and her are actually in here. I
Yeah.
watch her face out of my corner of my eye as she travels 25 years back in time.
Okay.
I do. She's finally says, a smile showing on one side of her mouth. I remember the times with Mr. Wright would catch something as scarce of his yelling, like the time. So, oh, you guys worked under Mr. Wright 25 years ago, right? Like I
Okay.
have these facts.
Okay.
I
So
don't
all
need
that
them up
makes
here.
sense.
And
Okay.
then these facts about taking the job because her father is Freemason, that's great fodder for this conversation. That's great stuff to put in here.
Okay.
So, what I want in this reflective conversation is something more like this. Silence returns to the car as Tiffany sits quietly, finishing her coffee and scone, her fingers busy with her cell phone. The car slows as more cars join us on the highway, and I begin to worry about arriving late. I would cut that because that's not what she's worried about. The car slows as more cars join us on the highway, and I begin to worry if every day this awkward silence is going to dominate our
Ah,
relationship.
okay.
This wasn't It wasn't like Tiffany was a stranger to me. We'd worked together since we were young.
Okay.
How is this moment in this car so awkward? Why does it have to be this way? Focus on what you want to focus on, right? Tiffany and Victoria are the point. Give me some sentences about Victoria struggling and anxious about the fact that this conversation is hard. And it's like, and you may even want to call back to Michael here, right? Like, this conversation is hard. You know, if Michael hadn't died, I could this have been easier? Am I the problem? And then have her like go into like,
Okay.
hey, do you remember 25 years ago, to try to start rebuilding that conversation? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
The
her like her having that almost flashback real quick to saying, wow, I actually did, we did know each other.
Yeah, and
We
you
did
want
have a connection.
yeah, you want Victoria to make an active choice here, right?
Okay.
Like that's the thing, is that you established the conflict. This car ride might be awkward, and I'm in a weird emotional place, and I don't like where I am. I don't want to talk to her. Should I just pull away? No, she's in the car. Oh crap! Now we're driving, and she immediately spilled her coffee. Clean it up, right? Like weird emotional place. You've established the conflict. How's this drive going to go? That's the conflict of the scene. We want at this turning point, any turning point you have, you want your vehicle character making an active choice.
Okay.
So here we want Victoria making an active choice to try to change the tone of the conversation in the car.
Okay.
Let's make a choice to change here. So, and those active choices can be preceded by these reflective paragraphs that show to the reader Victoria's trying to take things into her own hands. They don't always have to be successful. This time it's successful. They don't always have to be successful. And sometimes the active choice she makes could be terrible, right? The active choice she makes here could be like, I'm gonna, the silence is nice, and it allows me just to live in my memory of Michael. Every time she talks, I'm gonna shut her down. And then the rest of the conversation is Victoria being like, nope, I don't care. Nope. And right. And then we're just driving in silence. And that would be a negative active choice that like makes us
Right.
dislike Victoria. So this is a positive active choice, but we do want to use these reflective paragraphs to indicate your vehicle character, am now going to make an active choice to try to change the situation. And then the rest of the piece becomes us seeing the consequence of the choice that she's made. Is it working? Is it not working? Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because I felt like this was really fun to write because I felt they were reminiscing and I
Oh,
was
it's great.
finally getting to the beginning of the relationship that they need in order to move forward.
Yeah, it's great. And again, I don't need these dialogue tags
Yeah,
because there's just two of them. I'm
yeah,
keeping this one though, because you have her being interrupted. So it's important that you have the dialogue tag there for interruption.
Okay.
You put 3 dots here to indicate the interruption, an ellipses. This is 100% a style and preference thing. Typically, though, 3 dots means somebody's trailing off.
Okay.
An M dash, like 2
Better.
dashes, conveys stronger. I was gonna say something, but somebody cut me off.
Okay. That grammatically, that's good to know.
Yeah.
I use 3 dots for everything. I think in 3 dots. So
Yeah, and it means like, especially with text messages where 3 dots means like somebody's about to talk, it tends to mean like, oh, I'm kind of trailing off here. I don't really know what else to say. If
okay.
you want a quick abruption, I'd use an M dash with the quotation mark, and
Okay.
it communicates like this wasn't finished, but the other person started talking. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, but again, there's no grammatical rule there. That's just a style thing. This whole conversation here is great. They're having a good time. It's fun to read. It is a big payoff. You could cut a little bit. It goes a little long, but it's all fun. So I don't know that any of it's necessary to cut. I didn't mark any of it to cut. Um, Here you get to the end of their like fun conversation about the past, and it wraps well. And did Mr. Wright ever say thank you or tell you a good job? Nope, he did not. And I don't remember him ever telling me that. Me either. It ends with them facing each other.
Yeah.
So then you have a reflective paragraph that feels out of sync. The
Okay.
silence between us felt shared and heavy for a few moments as we turned off the slow highway onto the home stretch. Why is it heavy? They're having a good time.
Well, I think the very last piece was very emotional for both. This is a very toxic environment, and so
Okay.
remembering, they're remembering the toxicity
Okay.
of. I mean, they're bantering back and forth because that's what they remembered. But the very end is like he doesn't say thank you. In fact, he's pretty nasty,
Gotcha.
and does something very nasty later on. And so that for me was maybe it doesn't seem heavy. Maybe it didn't seem heavy to you. You're reading it differently because I'm the one sort of
I would
up
connect the
in their tail.
silence to that emotion.
Okay,
The silence between us felt shared and heavy as we both pondered the toxicity of the environment we'd grown up in.
okay, okay. All right, that
Right.
makes sense.
And
Yeah,
now we're together in our heaviness of silence. The only reason I'm saying that here is because silence was the conflict earlier.
right.
And the conflict should be pretty much solved at this point.
Yeah, yes.
So we don't want to come back to the conflict. It feels here the way it's written right now that you're coming back to the like, oh, now we're out of things to say.
So
And
the
so,
silence is more like we both stopped going, oh,
yeah,
okay.
so
Are
connect the
we
silence to the toxicity of
to
the
the
environment.
toxicity? Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Tell me what she's pondering, right? Like, and then that makes this like come back into the conversation that Victoria does. Or no, this is
That's
Tiffany
what
does.
it says. Yeah,
It
lunch.
makes it a nice like I'm moving past that
Okay.
hard spot. Yeah. Um, and you have the invitation for lunch is great. I think your wrap up is really good. Yeah. So it's
And
a
it goes on from there. They go into the office and get yelled at. So
nice.
I stopped it. Yeah, it's like a day in the life of.
Yeah. And if they get yelled at, you need to have her looking at Tiffany at some point and being like, some things never change.
Oh, okay.
That's how
Oh,
that needs to connect to this conversation, right?
right,
Like, yeah, 25 years, some things never change. And then they
right.
can go to work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah, really strong piece. Is there anything else about it, Lisa, you want to talk about?
No, that's fantastic.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this again to remember that last part because I won't remember everything, but
Well, and moving into your next pieces, like the tools I want you to carry over is using those reflective paragraphs to tell me the transition in the moment,
mhm,
right?
right,
Like, and remember that the most important thing in those reflections between segments is to convey to me the emotionality. Give me the emotional perspective of Victoria and how things are feeling right now. They're less about facts and they're more about like, how should Victoria and I feel about this?
yeah.
Right.
It's really interesting. I read a lot. I do a lot of books on tape, and I've been as I listen and as I've been doing this sort of listening to the dialogue doctor for so long, so much prose going on and
Yeah.
so much description. And I keep thinking it is in, some of it's more engaging than others. Some stories are more engaging than others. Like I'm reading one right now that is very prose and just a little bit of dialogue and very prose. And I'm like, wow, there is a huge difference between putting in the dialogue, but I also don't, I think there's a place for the prose, but I always like how much, how much
There
description
is.
you
Yeah.
give. And some
And
people like that, some people like the description.
a lot of it depends on the genre you're reading, right?
Mhm.
Like historical fiction is going to have more description because we're
Right,
kind of part of what we're reveling in is the historicity of the moment. Um,
right.
I find literary fiction has heavier descriptions in them and heavier like reflections because we're in it for the like the readers don't mind the weightiness of that thing. Like the weightiness of that kind of prose tends to um go along with the
Is it more
genre.
for the ambiance a little bit, more for like the
It's for the
feeling of,
ambiance and it's for the theme. Literary fiction lives and dies on like, hey, these are the themes we're writing about.
okay.
And so a lot of times they live in the prose because they're trying to make the setting part of the theme. And so you're like living in that theme, if that makes
Because
sense.
I'm writing something much more personal, like a
Yeah.
discovery journey. I
Yours
feel like,
is yours is a coming of age novel
yeah,
for a person finding their second life.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's much more personal and much more, there'd be much
Mm,
less of that descriptive. I keep feeling
yeah.
guilty that I'm not putting the descriptions in there, but feeling like they don't always fit necessarily, like, or when they do,
Yeah. And
they,
I would argue that modern readers and more modern writing is more dialogue heavy.
yeah.
And part of that is because we've grown so accustomed to visual media, which is all dialogue.
Mhm.
Um, like a screenplay is just the dialogue. And so we've grown so accustomed to stories being told through character interaction that we're losing our attention span for
Yeah,
longer and longer paragraphs. And I don't have scientific evidence of that. It's all just anecdotal from what I see from readers and like what I when I look at bestseller lists, I'm like and read the books on them, I'm like, yeah, this makes sense to me that this is a bestseller because it's so heavy in character interaction. And when I ask people to read old books and older books and they're like, ugh, it's so slow. I'm like, well,
yeah.
that's because there's so much more exposition in it. You're
Right,
not
right.
used to those.
That's sort of what I'm thinking about, but you're right. Like a couple of the last books I read that I like could not put down
Mhm.
were almost all dialogue.
Yeah, it keeps you locked in.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I just get the guilt off.
Yeah, no, and it is, there is a piece of like dialogue versus exposition and the percentage of that. Part of that too is your author voice.
Yeah,
Some authors just like slower books than others, and there's nothing wrong with that. You'll find your audience that likes those slower books. And by slower, I mean the more exposition, the more of those descriptive paragraphs, summaries, and like paragraphs of providing perspective through reflection. Those paragraphs, they slow the read down. And
yeah,
some authors write that way. They're like, this is if you're gonna get a book from like this author, this is what you can expect. And so they start to find readers that really like that kind of writing. And there's nothing wrong with that. Other authors I've found are like 90% dialogue, they're just moving, especially if they're like writing thrillers or writing thrillers or action novels, anything with
yeah,
detective type stuff. You're really moving. You're getting a ton of dialogue in there because
yeah.
they want it to feel like a quick read. Does that make
It's
sense?
so interesting to think about the differences and also to think about what I was writing before, which was very descriptive and very personal, but also very a lot of exposition, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
it was there was no dialogue in it.
Yeah,
In fact, when I first started, I'm like, oh God, I can write dialogue. Guess I'm gonna have to learn because there was like almost no dialogue. I didn't know how to put it in there because I can't take dialogue from somebody that I don't remember exactly what they said, and it had to
yeah.
be really close to it. Anyway, so coming from that I felt very comfortable writing, all of a sudden dumping myself into this has been fun and challenging.
Well, you're doing a great job with it. I really
Thank you.
like what you've done.
It's great.
Um, okay, I'm gonna stop the recording. We can talk a little bit more.
All right.